This is Everybody Pulls the Tarp with your host, Andrew Moses. Each week, Andrew talks with Olympians, pro athletes, TV stars, Grammy winners, best-selling authors, CEOs, and other high performers to uncover their success secrets.
My guest is Washington Commanders running back Austin Ekeler.
Every day we write a page of our life. The best thing is you have the pen in your hand.
Three-time Olympic gold medalist Tessa Virtue. Welcome back to Everybody Pulls the Tarp.
Thanks for thinking of me, and I'm a big fan of the podcast and of yours. So anytime you text or call, I'm here.
Mike Mills from REM.
The key to that was realizing at some point fairly early on that this was probably our life's work.
Every conversation is jam-packed with inspiration and actionable ideas.
My guest is 2023 WNBA Coach of the Year, Stephanie White.
The hardest thing for a coach is trying to prioritize how much time you put in one area or another.
Former MLB player, coach, and manager Clint Hurdle.
That is the best title of any podcast out there in America, and the content matches up to it. Andrew, you do a fantastic job. I'm a big fan. Keep up the great work.
World-renowned organizing expert Shira Gill.
You can improve your life simply by removing things.
Get ready for a behind-the-scenes look at the techniques, processes, and mindsets powering the world's most successful people.
Let's go.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. Have you ever wondered what it's like behind the scenes when a band is just getting started, trying to make a name for themselves? Or what it's like navigating the ups and downs that come with the fame, success, and fortune once a band has broken through and become one of the most popular of its generation? Well, if you've ever asked one of those questions, then you are in luck, because this week, my guest is Rusty Harmon. Rusty has spent his entire career in the music industry, and he is the original and former manager of one of my favorite bands of all time, Hootie and the Blowfish. Now, if you've been listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp for a while now, then you may remember past conversations I've had here on the podcast with Hootie and the Blowfish drummer, Jim Sony Sonnefeld, and Hootie's lead guitarist, Mark Bryan. But if you didn't listen to those conversations, aren't familiar with Hootie and the Blowfish, or you just need a quick refresher, here is their story. The band came together in the late 80s amidst humble beginnings. They rehearsed in a self-storage unit and played gigs at small bars and fraternity parties at the University of South Carolina. And slowly but surely, the band's crowds got bigger, and their popularity began to rise. Eventually, they were signed by Atlantic Records, and in 1994, Hootie and the Blowfish released their album Cracked Rear View. And this album was a massive success. Cracked Rear View features now iconic hits like Hold My Hand, Let Her Cry, and Only Want to Be With You. And the album hit #1 on the Billboard charts. It went on to sell more than 25 million copies and is still widely considered one of the best-selling albums of all time. So now most people know the band, Hootie and the Blowfish, and the four guys you see out front on the stage at their concerts. But what about the man behind the band? Well, for many years, that was Rusty Harmon, the band's original manager. And for years, Rusty booked the shows, promoted the shows, sold the merchandise, managed the band's travel, did the accounting, captured press and media, and so much more. In many ways, Rusty was the band's jack of all trades, the utility player, the person willing to wear different hats, do the little things, all while never saying that's not my job. A true tarp puller, as I like to say. Known for his risk-taking, creativity, and tenacity, Rusty found new ways to expand the band's reach in the early days, built a web of relationships in the music industry that propelled the band to new heights, and helped Hootie and the Blowfish maximize every single opportunity. And in the conversation you are about to hear, Rusty takes us behind the scenes. We dive deep into his work with Hootie and the Blowfish in the band's early days, and during the band's meteoric rise to fame. We also explore Rusty's career post-Hootie, as he went on to manage two other artists to #1 records, as well as the work he's doing today as the leader of Veer Music, a unique label services team where he partners with Warner Music Group. The conversation you are about to hear is about far more than music. It's filled with powerful ideas about building trusted relationships, creating a network, growing a brand, and the power of maximizing every opportunity in front of you. My friends, this conversation with Rusty is for anyone building something from the ground up. The ideas that Rusty shared can be applied to anything. And I hope you take away as much from this one as I have.
Oh, and one more thing. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for the advice of a physician, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.
So let's pull the tarp and get straight to Rusty Harmon.
Where I want to begin, you have said that you have been a music fan all of your life. So I am curious, what are your first memories of music? And what was your relationship with music like as a kid? Let's start there.
Oh my gosh. Great question. I guess everybody my age has a Beatles story of some sort, but I do remember when my parents would drive around with 8-track tapes in the car, and the Abbey Road record was out at the time. And I can still remember when I listened to some of those songs, where the music fades out and comes back in when it's switching from one track to another. So growing up listening to the Beatles, like certainly Hey Jude and all that. But then my dad was he listened to a lot of the like Frank Sinatra and a lot of the big band stuff back in the day. And my mom was really big on like Diana Ross and the Supremes and the Fifth Dimension. And then I think the first record that I kind of stole from their record collection was a Beach Boys live album that had Papa Ooh Mau Mau on it and all these great songs. And then once I discovered that record and wore it out, I'd kind of moved around into the Mamas and the Papas and Simon and Garfunkel. And so those were all the things when I was literally 5, 6 years old that I was listening to as a kid. I remember that distinctly. And then I had a cousin, her name is Charmaine, and Charmaine would come visit her grandmother, my great-grandmother, and she was the first person I ever knew that had like one of those old school record players that you'd carry around that played 45s. And I would come over in the summer and listen to her play her 45s, and it would be like Grand Funk Railroad and Frankie Valli and Jefferson Airplane and like all of those records. And then I'll tell you one of my favorite stories is because kids I teach at Lipscomb University now, so I'm always around these students who have grown up with Spotify and all the other DSPs, and they don't understand what it was like to have a favorite song and not have access to it because you couldn't afford to go buy the record, and you'd have to sit by the radio station and wait for it to come on every 3 or 4 hours, before you'd hear your favorite song. And so I used to do that. When Little Willie by Sweet came out, I used to sit around and listen for Little Willie to come on and play all the time. I used to love that. And I do hold a lot of those memories very near and dear to my heart. I loved how those old songs kind of just made me a fan of all those different types of bands and music. And one other thing, I know is a very short question and a very long answer, but one of the things I do miss a lot about back in the day, without sounding like, get off my lawn kind of guy, but I do love how, like today, you want to hear something or, you hear it and if you hear something like on TV and you Shazam it, then you go find it on the DSPs. I remember like if we heard something on the radio and if the DJ did not say, like if you got it in the middle of the song and then you're like, God, what is that? I love it. And then you kept waiting for the song to end so the DJ could say who it was. And then like if they didn't announce it, then you were stuck. Like you had to figure out who was that artist. And I remember like I would look at my watch and I would say, okay, it was 12:43 on Monday. And I would get wherever I was going and I would find the number of the radio station. I would call the radio station. I would say, hey, at 12:43 today, you guys played this song. Who was that artist? And then they'd tell you the name of the band or the artist. And I would save up, go cut 3 or 4 yards, save up the money, go to the record store, hope they had it in the store, come home, take the plastic off the vinyl album, and then I would scour the record reading all the liner notes and try to figure it, because that was the only place you could figure out anything about bands back in the day was on whatever they had written on the records. And I would look through all that information and try to figure out what I could. And so that's how we discovered music, where it's just so different today. But anyway.
Rusty, there's no question, just in our initial few minutes of chatting here, that there is just so much passion and energy that you have for music. It is undeniable just in the few minutes that we've gotten to spend together here today. I am curious, you mentioned the Beach Boys live album. What about live music? Do you remember your first exposure to live music, to a live show?
Yeah, well, obviously Don Kirshner's rock concert and the Midnight Special, Friday nights and Saturday nights. And then when Saturday Night Live was doing all the live bands, I found out about the Midnight Special was such a great show. And I was a Kiss fan very early on. And I remember when Kiss would play on the Midnight Special. And do you remember T-Rex, Bang a Gong, Get It On? Like when those guys would play, like you couldn't see them anywhere. Like they were just on TV, and there weren't a bunch of videos floating around. We certainly didn't have video channels. So like whenever I would find one of my favorite bands would play live, then I would sit up, and as a kid, you stay up till midnight to watch these shows. That was a big deal. But then my mom took me to a concert, and I'm not afraid to say it. My first concert was Neil Sedaka. My mom took me to the world of Sid and Marty Krofft in Atlanta, Georgia. Neil Sedaka was playing live at the world of Sid and Marty Krofft, and he played Calendar Girl and all that stuff. And I was just mesmerized by the live show. And this was a middle-aged keyboard player, not named Elton John. Like, it was a great show. And then the first real show that I saved up money and went to go see on my own, I was 14, and I went to see Kiss at the Greensboro Coliseum. And I was telling somebody about this the other day. It was Kiss and Ted Nugent. And I was telling somebody the other day, like, my uncle drove me from Winston-Salem to Greensboro, dropped me off in front of the Greensboro Coliseum because he wasn't going to go see Kiss. But he dropped me off and said, "Hey, I'll meet you out here in 3 hours." No phone.
Wow.
14 years old, going to see Kiss. And I said, "Okay, great. I'll meet you in 3 hours." I go in, see the show, and come back out 3 hours later, and there he is. I mean, how many parents would do that today? How many parents would drop off the 14-year-old and say, "We'll see you in 3 hours, no phone, no nothing"?
Not many. That is for sure. So I'm curious, Rusty, and by the way, and when I told Sony this, it made him feel, and Mark Bryan, it made them both feel very old. Sony and Mark Bryan, obviously from Hootie and the Blowfish, who you know well, and we'll get to some of that part of your career shortly. But I remember telling Sony and Mark that my parents would buy CDs, and I would listen to CDs that, cassette tapes first, and then CDs that they had. We were part of the different CD clubs back then that they would mail CDs to your house. But I believe that the first CD I ever went out and bought with my own money was Cracked Rear View, obviously one that you know very well.
Thank you very much.
Sony always tells me that story makes him feel quite old. But nevertheless, he was grateful that I went into, I believe it was Coconuts, a store in New Jersey at the time, and bought that album, which obviously went on to have tremendous success. And you were a major part of why. Rusty, so let's talk about kind of your journey into kind of the music business. Now, I understand that your first taste of kind of the professional world of the music industry was really not until college at NC State when you worked at the radio station there. But what about from like that Kiss concert when you're 14 years old until then? Like, did you know that music as a career, or at least the music industry, was something that you were interested in pursuing? Or did it not even strike you as a possibility till you got to NC State and had the opportunity to interact with some people in the music business? Talk about that for a moment.
So this was the early 80s, and high school and my first year of college. And I think that there may have been, I could be wrong, but because I've been teaching now for about 20 years, but I feel in the music industry, and I feel like that there may have been 2 or 3 schools, again, I could be wrong, but I think there were 2 or 3 that had some sort of music industry major. Belmont, and here in Nashville's been doing it for more than 50 years. I believe Stanford had a music industry major, and it was something, it might have been Arizona State or Colorado State or something like that. So one of those schools may have had a music industry program early on. But most of the people my age that are in the music industry and have been like in it for life, most everybody I know kind of somehow or another stumbled onto their job. Like you didn't go to school to be an A&R rep at a record label, or a radio promotions person, or a publicist, a record label, or working sales for a manufacturer or whatever. Like it just kind of happened. And for me, yeah, there was this love of music, as we've discussed. But no, I did not. And I knew about record labels, and I saw the logos on the back of records, and Atlantic and Columbia and Casablanca and all these great labels that from back in the day. But I didn't have the foggiest clue as to how I could actually be employed, or I didn't even know where they were. They were mythical as far as I was concerned. And then that journey of just being a fan, and I have so many great music stories. One of my favorites that I like to tell might have been my senior year in high school. My best friend, Dean Wright, we were big Journey fans, big Journey fans. And Journey was playing a show, and I didn't have any money whatsoever. And we were standing in line at the lunch line, and I was really good friends with a lot of people at school. And lunch at our school cost 90 cents, or if you just got the meal and one milk, but you could get 2 milks and it was 95 cents. So everybody paid with $1 and everybody got a nickel or a dime back, everybody. I was sitting there in the line, and they were talking about how they were going to, I think it was Foreigner, Journey, and somebody 38 Special or something like that. And it was a great bill, and I wanted to go to the show so bad. And I stood there, and I was standing in line next to my buddy Dean, and I said, you know what? If I went to all my friends in here that just got a nickel or a dime back, I bet I could get the $7.50 it cost to get a ticket to this concert. And this was 1981. And he's like, oh, you wouldn't do that. And I said, dude, hold on. And I started it, man. I started going around to everybody in the lunchroom, and everybody's just giving me a dime, a nickel, a dime, a nickel, a dime, a nickel. I ended up with $12. And we went that day and went and bought a ticket to go see Journey and Foreigner play. So it was just a great experience. And that was always that. So there was always kind of that love of the music, and how am I going to be a part of it? I got to figure it out. So fast forward, I ended up going to NC State as a chemistry major, and that didn't work out at all. And I ended up changing through a series of events that are much too long to discuss. I ended up changing majors to communications, ended up working at the college radio station, and it was a fluke. I had actually flunked out of school, lost my academic scholarship, and was trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and did not know what I was going to do next. And a friend of mine, I was a big fan at the time of an artist named Joe Jackson, and he had a song out at the time called Is She Really Going Out With Him? Loved that song, loved that record. Sunday Papers was a great album. And so a friend of mine asked if I wanted to do T-shirt security at the Joe Jackson concert at NC State's Reynolds Coliseum, where NC State used to play basketball. And I was like, yeah, God, I'd love to do that. And so all I wanted to do was to be able to see the show for free. And I thought, oh, great, I'll get next, I'll be in the front row, telling people to sit down or whatever. And they start giving out all the positions for where people had to position themselves during the show. And they gave out all the great positions. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll be up in the rafters, but I'll still get to see the show. And then finally they came to me and they said, hey, Rusty, we want you here backstage to make sure that nobody goes between the dressing room and the backstage area that's not supposed to be there. I was like, oh, I don't even get to watch the show. So I was so mad, but I'm standing there, I've been there a couple hours, bored to tears, missed the opening band. And then the catering department brings in the food for Joe Jackson and his band. And I'm standing right outside the dressing room door. And Joe Jackson sticks his head out and says, hey, what's your name? And I said, Rusty. And he said, hey, you want to come in and eat with us? I said, yeah, that'd be great. So I get to go inside and eat steak and potatoes with Joe Jackson right before he went on stage. So I got to meet him, which was awesome. But then at the end of the evening, one of the girls that was in charge of the security thing also was the program director at the college radio station. And she was lamenting over the fact that it was the end of the semester and all of her, remember I told you, everybody in my generation stumbled onto their job. This is how I stumbled onto mine. She was lamenting the fact that everybody had graduated and all of the people were leaving, and she had to cover 3 shifts tomorrow, the next day at that at WKNC, the student run radio station. And I was like, oh, well, so what do you need? What do you mean you need to cover the shift? She's like, well, I don't have any DJs. I said, well, how hard is it? She's like, would you be interested? I was like, well, what do you got to do? And she said, I'll tell you what, if you're interested, she said, are you a student at State? And I said, and I didn't tell her I had just flunked out. But I was like, yeah, I got my ID card. I'm still a student at NC State. And she said, well, show up at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at the station. I'll teach you how to do it. And then you can go on the air. And I said, okay, great. So I showed up at 10 o'clock the next day. And the guy that was on the air was a guy named Mark Anthony, was his radio name. His real name is Mark Zeno. He and I are still friends today. He actually worked with me in Hootie World years later. But Mark was on the air, and he was kind of like you right now. He was standing in front of the microphone, but he didn't have his headphones on. He was just talking to me, normal. And then like the song was ending, and it's like if you've ever been around radio people, or you probably have done it yourself, but the song was like 10 seconds from ending, 5 seconds, 3 seconds. And I'm like, dude. And he's like, hey, hold on a second. Puts on the headphones, clicks the on the air button, and goes, hey, this is Mark Anthony, WKNC 1045, and coming up next, blah, 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 blah. And he gets finished and takes off the headphones, pushes the button, looks at me and said, okay, what was it you were saying? And my eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. And I was like, what, were you just talking to all of those people? He's like, yeah, man. And I was like, and you just did it like right before the song ended. And that was it, man. I was like, I got to do this. And so I ended up changing my major to communications and started working at the radio station. And I held just about every position you could have at the radio station. Long story short, at the end of my career at the radio station, I started a show called Triangle Live. And I was interviewing bands from Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. That's where and we had kind of everybody talked about the music scene in Athens and the music scene in Seattle. Those were the big music scenes in that time. The music scene in that area was understated. And I don't think people realize how many great artists came from that little triangle area. But a guy that ended up helping me get a lot of the bands to interview those bands was this guy named Dick Hodgen. Dick ended up being my mentor, but he was a producer and a manager. And again, pre-internet, before it was everything was DIY. So he booked bands himself. He produced the bands. He managed the bands. He was their promo team. He did everything for them. And I ended up interning for him mainly because I realized that if I interned for him, I could get into clubs to see all these bands for free. So I got to start going around and seeing all these bands. And there's a band called Flat Duo Jets that he managed, and another band called Johnny Quest that were two of the biggest bands in that region at the time. And he asked me to go on the road to this festival had just started in Austin, Texas. And it was only 2 nights, and nobody had ever heard of it. It was called South by Southwest. And he's like, if you go to Austin, I mean, it was literally maybe the first or second year of South by Southwest. And
wow,
I'd have to look and figure out exactly when it started, but it was that year. I ended up riding in a van with the Flat Duo Jets to Austin, and I was their quote unquote road manager, but nobody road managed Dexter Romweber. Like, he was a force unto himself. And at the time, they were signed to a record label called Doggone Records, which was Jefferson Holt's record label. Jefferson Holt was the original manager of REM. So REM at that time was my favorite band in the history of the world. And I got to go meet Jefferson Holt, who was the manager of REM. So it just one thing after another kind of just kept happening for me. And then Dick would give me, because he knew I liked to listen to new music, he would give me a box of cassettes every week that people had sent him, and to ask him if he would produce their new demo, because he did these low budget demo tapes for $2,000-$3,000. And so he'd give me 10 or 15 tapes every week. And I would literally go home on Friday night with my buddies and sit and listen to these songs from these bands. And one day I got one from this band from Columbia, South Carolina called Hootie and the Blowfish. And I listened to it and I was like, well, stuff's pretty good. And I went into Dick's office on Monday and said, man, you should listen to this. This is a good tape. And he's like, oh, we can't work with that band. That's the stupidest name in the world. They'll never make it. It's a waste of time. I said, no, really, it's pretty good. And they had a song called Hold My Hand that ended up being a big hit for him. And I said, listen to this song. And I played it for him, and he's like, yeah, it's pretty good. Why don't you get him in the studio? And so I did. I called him and I booked him to come down to the studio, and that was that. They came down and we ended up hanging out.
Well, I remember when you mentioned Dick's name in particular, I remember in Sony's memoir, In one of the conversations I've had with Sony over the years, he talked about Dick. They made overtures to Dick to produce them. And he gave them basically a huge talking to, like that there was no way on earth that he was going to do that. And I guess the second part of that story that I know now is that cassette tape ends up in the pile that he sent home with you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny. They were staying at a friend's house, and I ended up partying with them the first night they came into town. I don't know if they remember this story, but I remember it vividly. And we all ended up, late night, I'll say falling asleep. We all know what happened. We all passed out. And I'm sleeping on the floor at their buddy's house, and I woke up in the middle of the night with a rat walking over my leg. And I was like, yeah, I'm out. I got to get out of here. And I got up and left. And I called in the next day and said, guys, if y'all want to stay at my place, man, I got a good, clean house with lots of room. You're more than a couple couches. You're more than welcome to come stay at my place. And so they ended up coming to my house and staying the rest of the week. But yeah, no, they not only did they want Dick to produce them, and Dick said no, they asked Dick to manage him, and Dick said no. And Dick talks about it all the time. But we also talk about how Dick would have managed them. He doesn't think that all this would have happened just because he didn't live with them and live for them the way that I did in the beginning. And that's really what it took in the beginning for that band.
So let's talk about that and dive in. For somebody who's not entrenched in the music scene back then or near the music industry now that's listening to this conversation and wants to understand, like, what does a band manager, what does somebody who's going to kind of piece this all together before the band has really broken out and begin to manage a band like that? Like, what does that look like? What are the set of responsibilities look like? Because everybody that I've talked to about you talks about you as this risk taker. You're creative. You think outside the box. So what were you doing? What does the job look like? And let's start with the early days, and then we'll get into the breakout and post-breakout, obviously, of Hootie and the Blowfish, which is just an incredible, incredible story for you all.
Right. Yeah. Well, so again, Dick is my mentor, and I watched everything that he did, and I worked alongside of him for about 2 years. And what I always say about Dick is that he always did whatever the bands needed him to do, like whatever was most important in the band's career at that moment, and that phone call on that at that hour and that day and that evening, like what was most important for the band right then. And that's what he would do, or that's what he would ask me to do and help him do, or whatever. And so when I started managing Hootie in the beginning, there was about a 6-month period where I would call Dick every single day and be like, dude, what do I do? Like, they asked me to do this. And then I just kind of realized that, okay, like, what is the most important thing today? And for them, I say this to anybody that'll listen to me to say it. One of the reasons that band was so successful, they were the single best cover band I had ever heard. Some of the covers that they came up with and the way that they would play this, they were just amazing live. They had the best live set, and they would always work in their originals. But when they would play some of those covers, they were just great. They're great songs. So like them playing live, whenever they played live, it resonated with people. You could just see fans, like people would stop talking at the bar and turn around and go to the stage and watch them play. And then people would buy merchandise. And so it was like, okay, they got to play. And they don't have a booking agent. Well, Dick used to book all these people. Hey, Dick, who's that guy at the Mad Monk in Wilmington that you used to? Oh, yeah, Charlie Maltby. Oh, can you give me his number? Yeah. Hey, and ask him, where's my biscuit? And so I'd call up Charlie Maltby and say, hey, Dick Hodgins says, where's his biscuit? And then he would talk to me for 10 minutes about their stupid biscuit story. And before I knew it, Hootie's opening up for Cowboy Mouth at the Mad Monk in Wilmington. And so then I like, oh, we're playing in Wilmington. Well, I got to get them something, I got to get them something heading to Wilmington. So let's pick up a show on the way there. So I just started booking shows, and then, we had to have merchandise while we were. So, okay, well, who makes merchandise? How do I do this? And then I jump in and figure out merchandise. Oh, well, we got to promote these shows. Let's get a concert calendar. And let me call Charlie at the Mad Monk and ask him if he's got a street team. And Charlie's like, well, what's a street team? And so I would help the Mad Monk start a street team with people that promoted the Hootie show. And then because I worked at college radio, I was like, let's see if there's a college radio station at UNC Wilmington. And then I would find the DJs at the UNC Wilmington, and I would say, hey, can we come by and do an interview today? So it was just like one thing after another. And I was just always thinking, like, what do they need? How can I help them? What can I do for them? in this market going to this show. And is there a record store there? Oh, let's go introduce, because man, cool kids work at the record store. Let's go to the record store and introduce ourselves and invite them to the show. And then all of a sudden you got 5 kids from this record store coming and bringing their girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever. And now you've got a built-in group of people that are passionate about music, that are fans of the band. And then I would find the local publications, like, because again, before the internet, and so it was print media, and well, who's a creative loafing, or who does music interviews, and who advertises concert calendars. And so I would go to the publications and say, hey, come out to the show and meet the band. Oh, do you want to interview the band? And you want to take a picture of them? Like, so just whatever I had to do, I would just figure it out. Honestly, a lot of it was, I wanted the guys to be proud of me. I wanted to sit down in a meeting with them and say, guys, guess what I got for you? I got this interview at this publication. And then we go, man, that's a great job, Rusty. And so, like, it was, honestly, that's what it was. And it just, those little things just kept getting to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And we started meeting promoters, and we started getting more opportunities and people. We went from playing Tuesday nights and Wednesday nights in these places to headlining on Friday nights to, like, Myrtle Beach, the Purple Gator at Myrtle Beach. We would play 2 or 3 nights during the week, during the course of a month. But then they started calling me and saying, hey, it's Easter weekend, and this place is going to be a zoo, and Budweiser's doing Budfest. Do you want to play the Friday night of Budfest? And that meant instead of making $500 a night, we might get a chance to make $3,000 or $4,000. And I was like, yeah, we'll take Budfest. Let's do that. We'll do that. So, yeah.
We'll do that.
So then, before we know it, like within a couple of years, instead of playing for beer and wings, we're now playing for $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a night in some of these places. And so I booked the band for 3 years. And then after about 3 years, we started getting some phone calls from some local booking agents that started helping us. And I already had a history of, when we got our first phone call from a booking agent, we probably had 30 markets that we had played. And that, what I just said about Wilmington, I did the same thing in every single market. Like, if it was Athens or Greenville or Clemson, Spartanburg or Asheville or New Orleans or Jacksonville, with all of those markets. And what I always told people is, man, the great thing about being in the Southeast is you're never more than 90 minutes away from a cool college town. Like, they're everywhere. Blacksburg, Elon College, like Wofford College, and they're everywhere. There's great. We just got tapped into all those colleges, all the college radio stations, the fraternities, the sororities, like all the things. We did it, and that's how it kind of grew for that band.
All right, everyone. We'll get back to the conversation momentarily. But first, I want to tell you about my free weekly email newsletter, Tarp Pullers. Each week, I share an uplifting and inspirational tarp pulling story that is sure to brighten your day. And I also highlight some of the most powerful ideas I've learned on my journey talking to 200 and counting of the world's top performers. The newsletter is short, concise, and a reader recently told me this. She said it makes her day every time it hits her inbox. Go to everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter to sign up today. It's so interesting, Rusty, to hear you share all this, because there's so much there to unpack. But what strikes me about, like, what you do so well is you build this network that compounds on every node of the network, right? Like, and you get a hook into one town, and then you're not just satisfied with that one hook, like, we're going to go play that one gig. You add the media, the radio, building relationships, going down to the store, getting into the local papers, and then that starts to fan out. And then you do it somewhere, like you said, 80 to 90 miles up the road. You create that same web. The web's kind of probably connect in some way, and then you do it again. Like, it's just remarkable, because I think so often people in any industry, any craft, they just say, okay, like, I'm going to go do that one thing and hope that it leads to something or it works out. What you did was you would get that hook into somewhere, and then you'd build around it. It's just so impressive.
Well, thank you. I'd like to be able to take credit for being intentional about it. I think it literally just kind of happened. And I didn't want to fail the band. I wanted to do a good job for them. And it was exciting, man. It was like, it was the party that never ended. And I used to always say it's better than getting a real job. Like, it was always so fun and exciting, and traveling and meeting new people. And watching the fan base grow. Like once you do a couple markets, and you, like again, I keep using that Wilmington example, but it's so true. Once you're able to break down that barrier with the guy that books the club, if he owns it or if he books it, I tell young bands this all the time. If you're trying to play a new market, pick 2 rooms in that market that you want to play, the smaller room and then the bigger room. And while you're playing the small room, invite the guy to the bigger room to come see you play at the small room, because eventually you're going to outgrow that small room. And you don't want to have to start cold calling that guy at the bigger room after you've outgrown this room. You want this guy to say, hey, you're doing really well down here. Do you want to come play my room? And so like once you break down that barrier, and then it's not just a cold call, it's not just another band trying to get a gig. Now you're friends with the guy.
There's a relationship.
Yeah. And now he's trying to help you. Like he wants to make money. He wants your band to be successful. So he's giving you good nights. He's telling you like, man, I know the person I know the editor for the music section of the newspaper. Call him. He's expecting your call. I told him about you guys. So call him and set up an interview and do the same thing with him. Go meet him, have a beer with him and get to know him. Because man, if he likes you, he's going to say good things about your band. So I just did that in every single market. I just got to know the club owners. I got to know the local press people in all those places. I got to know the college radio stations in all those places. To me, it was easy. It was fun. It was exciting. I don't mind talking to new people. Like it was just always a lot of fun for me to do that.
So fast forwarding a little bit, Hootie and the Blowfish, their iconic biggest album, Cracked Review, gets released in July of 1994. I mean, it's a success. I mean, out of the gates. I mean, the album sells about 500,000 records or so from July through November, and then things start to take off. Infamously, you get the call from David Letterman's booking team. You initially decline the band going on David Letterman, which is interesting, and we'll get into that because the band had a huge show booked, I think at a 3,000 seat venue that they had sold out that same day.
Yep.
And I guess just to pause there for a second, I mean, I think what's interesting, if people listening hear this story, they're like, well, Rusty's managing these guys and David Letterman's booking team calls and they want the band, who's again, having some success, has already sold 500,000 records for Cracked Review in the first couple of months. You decline Letterman. People must be thinking, they must be driving or walking or listening to this conversation now going, oh my goodness, how could Rusty say no to Dave Letterman? But in retrospect, it seems obvious. But you had a huge show booked and the band wasn't playing 3,000 seat venues every single night. And then the band ended up getting to do Letterman anyway that day. So take me through that story. What was your initial thought process? Was it as simple as we can't do this because we got a 3,000 seat venue ready for us that night? And then how does it end up happening?
Well, first of all, for all those people walking or driving and listening to this podcast, and they're thinking that, you should know that very few decisions that I make on my own, every decision that I made included a conversation with the band in some way. And we were the perfect size band because there were 5 of us, the 4 band members and me. And so we had a tiebreaker for every vote that we made. We could always say if somebody overruled somebody else, and we were very democratic about just about everything that we did. But for this particular conversation, it was Rusty. We're playing the Township in Columbia. No, we can't cancel that. Like we sold out the Township. You got to remember, these guys went to the University of South Carolina. They played in the smallest of rooms, like Happy's chicken wing place or whatever it was called. They went to the Elbow Room and Group Therapy and Rockefellers and all these rooms. And then we rented out the Armory or whatever. And like we did all that. We kept growing and growing and growing and growing in that market. And now we're playing the same venue that Toad the Wet Sprocket played and all these great bands that we were fans of had played. It was 3,000 seats and we sold it out. And so we get the call on a Monday, and it was the Monday after Thanksgiving. So it was
not Black Friday, but the following Friday.
Right. So it was the Monday after Thanksgiving, and the booking agent for Letterman calls me and says, hey, you guys want to play Letterman? And I said, let me call you right back. And I talked to the band. They're like, no, we can't do it. And so I call them and I say, hey, thanks so much for the offer, but can we play a different night? We can't do it. They had a cancellation, and that's why they wanted us to play. And apparently David Letterman had just heard the band on WNEW in New York, and he loved to say Hootie and the Blowfish. If you Google David Letterman, and Hootie and the Blowfish and watch him say the name. Like, it was so funny how he used to say it all the time. And so I say no. And I'm waiting for them to call me back to give me another day, And 5 minutes after I said no, the president of Atlantic Records calls me and says, Rusty, did I hear correctly? Did you just turn down David Letterman? And I said, well, yeah, we got this show at the township. And he's like, Rusty, we'll get you a plane. And I said, dude, I would love to sit here and say at 26 or 27 or however old I was, I'd love to sit here and say that I knew that David Letterman taped at 4:30 in the afternoon and that it wasn't live at 11:30 at night. But I did not know that. I thought that it was live at 11:30 every night when it went on. But no, they tape it at 4:30, and the Fallon and Kimmel and all those shows tape in the middle of the day. So he said, Rusty, we'll get you a plane. And I said, okay, can we be back? And he's like, yeah, it tapes at 4:30. You'll be done at 5:30. We'll get you back to Teterboro and we'll have you back on the ground by 7:00. And the show starts at 8:00. You'll have plenty of time. And I said, okay, yeah, all right, let's do it. So then, yeah, we get the plane and we go fly and do Letterman. And the girl that booked David Letterman was a girl named Sheila Rogers, she was such a fan of the band and a good friend of mine for a long time. We played the show 13 times, and she was awesome. I loved her. And I was calling up Sheila during the week because I had seen bands before that, were promoted and they were going to be on the show. And then Dave at the end of the night, and late night TV then compared to what it is now is not near the same. Obviously, TV was king back then, and David Letterman was the king of kings. And so I watched Letterman all the time, and I would see it. They'd be talking about, hey, the Meat Puppets are going to be on tonight, and they'd show their picture and everything, and then they'd get to 12:30, and it's like, oh, sorry, we didn't have time for the Meat Puppets tonight. We'll get them back here next week or something like that. So bands would be advertised as being on the show, and then they would go long. A comedian would go long, or Drew Barrymore would talk about something way too long, whatever. Something would happen, and the band would get nixed from the show. And I was like, Sheila, God, are we going to get nixed from the show? Like, are we going to do all this? Are we going to fly up there and get a plane and jeopardize starting our show late in Columbia and not get to play the show? And she's like, Rusty, no. David loves the band. He wants to see him play. Like, you'll get to play, I promise. Like, okay, but I'm really, it'd be awful if we can't play the show. And so we got there and we were sitting there waiting. And that's all I could think about the whole time, is that we're going to get there and we're not going to be able to, they're going to run late and we're not going to get to play the show. And then finally they call us out on the thing and then the band played the show. I know you know the story, but it was a turning point in the band's career. We had sold, like you said, 500,000 records up to that point. And so that was 4 weeks before Christmas. And in the 4 weeks between, we sold 500,000 records from July to November, thought we were going to get dropped and not make it to a second single. And then we played Letterman. And from the 4 weeks from Thanksgiving, the week after Friday, Thanksgiving to Christmas, we sold another 500,000 records. And then from January of 95 to January of 96, we sold 12 million records. So we sold 1 million records a month for 12 months. And yeah, the Letterman thing, Letterman was certainly the tip of the spear, I guess, but it really rallied the entire record, Atlantic Records, our team that we had around us, all the radio team, Andrea Gannis and Danny Bush, and our publicists, Jim Lawrence and Patty Conte, and our product manager, Ken Kyman. Everybody just rallied around the band in a big way. I guess, that's what they did for a living. They broke records, and they saw that here was a band that was ripe for breaking. And so they all just jumped in, and I started going to now. I used to drive. So funny. I used to drive to New York, stay at a buddy's house in New Jersey, take a cab to the ferry over to Manhattan, walk from the ferry to the offices at Atlantic, stay from 9 a.m. till 7 p.m, and then cab and walk back to the ferry. I'll take the last ferry back across the island, stay in the cab it back to my buddy's house in Cliffside Park, New Jersey, And that's how I went to New York for the first 6 months. And then after that, all of a sudden I'm flying first class, staying at the Omni Berkshire at 52nd Madison. They got me a suite. And now I'm got black car service everywhere I go. And everything changed. Everything. They gave me an office at Atlantic Records. Like I had my own office. It was a lot of fun, man. It was a great ride.
A tremendous ride. And I'm always reminding people when we look at these success stories, your career, and obviously the guys in Hootie and the Blowfish and so many other, hundreds of the world's most successful people that I've had conversations with over the years on this podcast. People think that success is overnight. And sometimes it looks like that, like because something changes overnight, but it is always tried and true. It is always just so many steps, and oftentimes not just one individual, but many individuals working together to literally will something into existence. And I mean, the stories that you've told there are no different. So all in all, you guide Hootie and the Blowfish through the earliest and most successful part of their career through 3 number 1 releases, over 25 million records sold worldwide, multiple Grammys, MTV Music Award, Billboard's Artist of the Year, and more. But then things kind of run its course. You decide to go your separate ways, but even to this day, you're still involved managing Sony's solo career and Mark Bryan's solo career. You're just one of the most loyal people in an industry that probably doesn't have a ton of loyal people. But in addition to the work with Hootie, I want to kind of fast forward. You've gone on to manage 2 other artists, the number 1 records. Over the course of your career, you've run management companies, record labels, label services, and distribution companies. And today you're leading Vera Music, a unique label services team with global distribution from the Warner Music Group's independent distribution arm, ADA. I am curious, Rusty, when you think about like that transition, right? Because it may not be in the music industry. It may not be at the peak of a wave like you were all riding at the peak of the Hootie and the Blowfish ride. But so many of us go through these moments in our career, moments in our stories where there's transition, there's change, there's kind of a reset. How did you reconcile all that? Because I would imagine you get through a phase like that where things are running so hot after things were so lean, and then you're kind of trying to figure out, well, what's next? How did you go about figuring out for you what was next?
Well, that's a short question that I could probably spend hours talking about. But I want one correction. I do want to say, for those people that do manage Mark and Sony, I'm not their manager. I put out their records. My label, Veer, puts their records out.
Correct. I stand corrected.
That's okay. I really respect their management teams, and I like them a lot. And they're some of the best managers in the business. I didn't want to take credit for anything like that. But honestly, so it's kind of I guess the PG version of all of this is when things are going good with a manager and a band, there's not a better job in the world. It's when you've got a band that's on a major label and you've got a label paying attention to you and you've got a single at radio and you're touring and, tour buses and planes and big venues and sold out shows. And when you're doing that, obviously there's problems and there's issues and you have to handle things with that band's career. Those are the good times. That's when you've really, all your hard work's paid off and everybody's in sync. And some of the best bands, like Kenny Chesney's had the same manager for 30 years, Dave Matthews and Clore and Capshaw, 30 years. Like these relationships that these big bands have had with their managers for years and years and years. It's awesome when that happens. When you are at the other end of that and you've got an artist that changes managers, like they change girlfriends or like they change blue jeans or whatever, there are artists that just, when something negative starts happening in an artist's career, it's hard for anybody. When something bad happens, it's hard for anybody to step back and say, why is this happening? Am I responsible for this? Is my team not doing a good job? When you're an artist, you're on such a pedestal every night. Like the ego is, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying that think about adoring people yelling for you and clapping your every move every single night of your life. Like you're used to performing and being the center of attention in everything that you do. And with that comes a certain amount of confidence and a personality trait that says you are amazing. I am the most important person in this room. just ask me, I'll tell you, because I get clapped for and cheered for every night. So if there's something wrong with my career, it can't be my fault. People are clapping for me. You must be screwing up. What are you doing wrong? And I've been in that situation several times. The Hootie guys did it, early in our career. They would say the same thing to me, but then we would talk through things and we would work through situations. And we were a committed team, and we had a relationship that really handled that kind of hard questioning consistently. We would get through those moments, and the best managers do. But when it's controversial and when there's ego involved and when it becomes confrontational and everything's confrontational, man, it can just start to wear on you and suck the joy out of you. And that's kind of what started happening for me. Is I ended up in a handful of those relationships that just weren't very positive in a lot of ways. And bands, they were having success, but then something would happen and they would be lured away by something else, or grass is always greener, whatever the case is. But so I ended up in some of those situations. But the one thing that I always loved doing, no matter what level of band, I don't care if it was Hootie and their third record with everybody, the world paying attention, or if it's a new band that I just signed that's putting out their first record. I love the process of developing a marketing campaign, coming up with a plan to release that record, and then putting out the record and then executing that plan every step of the way. Like, that was always the most fun, the most rewarding experience for every band that I ever managed. And I woke up 20 years later and I was like, wow, I love running record labels. Like, that's fun. I can do it. Like, I do a good job doing it. And so it's kind of that metamorphosis of getting the joy sucked out of me from managing, but I really enjoy putting out records. So let's make that change. And it kind of happened in a weird kind of way. And I went from a really bad label with not a very good distribution partner to a really good label with a great distribution partner. And the last 5 years running Veer Music and working with the Warner team and ADA. And honestly, it's all like Warner's Atlantic Records that Hootie was assigned to was owned by Warner Music. Warner owns ADA. I did my deal with ADA through Craig Cowman, who was the CEO of Atlantic for a long time. And he was there when Hootie was there. Craig and I have stayed friends. He introduced me to the ADA team. My label rep at ADA is a guy named Robert Turner, one of the greatest people in the world. Robert was my college marketing rep at Atlantic Records when he went to the University of South Carolina back in 1994. So, like, I've known Robert for 30 years, and now we're working together. He's at ADA, and I'm working with him. So I've got this relationship with my distributor that is really, really hard to get. Like, it's hard to have that kind of integral in-weaving of relationships before you ever put out the first record. I've already got this great relationship with this team at ADA. So that transition from manager to label head to working with a digital distribution company that you already have a tremendous amount of respect for, like, all of that really just it just evolved. And I've been lucky to kind of be at the center of it all. And it's been a great experience.
But I'll go back to what I said a little bit earlier. I mean, to me, it all goes back to the way you've operated your entire career. I mean, you've put relationships first. You are relentless about kind of creating opportunity on top of opportunity and not just taking one thing for granted, but connecting the dot here and connecting the dot there. I think it's truly a through line in your journey, in your career. How do you determine, like, now, artists that you feel like you're a good fit for versus artists that you might not be a good fit for? I'm curious to hear your take on that.
Well, first of all, let me explain just a little bit about what Veer is, because Veer is a little bit different than a lot of traditional labels and a lot of traditional distributors. That'll answer your question. But so Veer, our priority is it's digital distribution. And so there's a variety of people that do it, and they do it in different capacities. One of the biggest differences between all of the distributors is the services provided by the distribution team. So Veer is a sub-label under ADA. ADA is a distributor, and artists do direct deals with ADA all the time. We're a sub-label under ADA. So we sign artists, and then we build out marketing campaigns We deliver those marketing campaigns to our label rep, Robert Turner, and then Robert takes that information and pitches to the DSPs. So we specialize in playlist pitching to editorial playlisters at the DSPs. A lot of people don't realize the 5 main DSPs all have offices in Nashville. So Amazon, Spotify, Apple, Pandora, YouTube all have offices here. Robert meets with each of those companies weekly and goes over the pitches. And then what separates us, I think, from a lot of those other distributors, because they all do a great job in their capacity for what they're able to do. But what separates us from the very beginning, we said, hey, one of the big issues is communication. Artists feel like when they sign with a digital distribution company, a lot of times they lose contact. Like they have a great first meeting, but then they can't get anybody back on the phone or to reply to an email. So we have a standing weekly meeting with each and every client on our roster that's in a release cycle. So not only do we develop the campaign and deliver it to the label rep at ADA, pitch weekly, but then we meet with the artist weekly. So we're holding their hand. I have a great team. Paige Hyman is my product manager, and Kaylin Townsend is the product coordinator. The project coordinator manager, those two help run the machine really smoothly. But we meet with each of those clients each week, and then we go over assets that are due, any deadlines that are coming up. And then we always ask them, hey, what's happening in your career this week? What publicity did you get? What social media activity is going on? Did you get an Instagram reel that's going crazy right now? Or did you come into some money for advertising? Or do you have a tour that you're announcing? Or did you do a pre-save with a brand that you gave away? And how many people signed up for that pre-save? That's all information that we give to Robert, who then passes that information along to the DSPs. So that's what Veer does. In order to answer your question, how do we pick who's a good fit for us? Well, it's pretty simple. The more you do on your own, the more activity you have around your career, the better story we're able to tell to Robert, who's then able to sell you better to the editorial playlisters at the DSPs. So bands that tour, bands that play some, if I don't care if it's a bluegrass band, an Americana band, a country band, or pop band, or a worship band, or a CCM artist, a Christian artist, as long as if you're playing live shows, there's so much. Think about all the activity. I think about all that stuff I said earlier that can happen around the live show. Today, with social media, if you've got a live show, if you got a show booked, man, that's social media content. You can promote the show for 3 or 4 weeks. You can do live feeds from the show. You can take videos while you're there and do post feed stuff. You can sell your merchandise while you're there. You can do interviews in that market while you're there. There's so much activity that you can do around a live show. And then we take that information and we bundle it all up nicely and give it to Robert and say, look at everything that they did around the show. So if you're a band that plays 2 or 3 live shows a week, and you stretch that into a 3 or 4 week tour, and then we come up with ideas like let's do a lot of people do a tour that it's the name of the album. I like to do tours that are the name of a single, because you're promoting a single for 4 weeks, or 4 or 5 weeks, however long it is. So name your that 4 week stretch the name of your single, and have a QR code every night that goes to a link tree or a link fire that allows you to stream the song. So if the name of your song is God is Great, and you're playing a show and it's the God is Great tour, somebody goes to the merch table and they scan the QR code, and now you go to Spotify and you add the single to your playlist. That's how many people, 50, 100, 300 people that are at that show that maybe get to scan that single that night. Well, if I get 300 people adding a new single in the Atlanta demographic and DMA, and then I go back to Robert and say, man, they played the show, 300 people in Atlanta added it. He goes and tells Spotify that, or Apple that. They get all excited because now they realize that people are driving people to their platforms. So then they extend more opportunities for playlisting. So it's an extension of what I've always done management-wise, but now I get to do it on the digital distribution world.
I'm making, like, you can see my hands. I'm making like a wheel, like it's a spinning wheel. Like,
yeah,
just like you and the Hootie guys got those wheels spin, or I'll even go further back. I mean, just like you got the wheel spinning on your career by a variety of different things, but by taking that opportunity to go see Joe Jackson, where you thought you'd get to see the show and work security, end up at the backstage eating steak and potatoes, and then you end up working at the radio station the next day. I mean,
yeah.
You and Hootie got that wheel spinning. In a similar sense, these artists get their wheel spinning, and then you add like rocket fuel to keep that wheel spinning and maybe spinning even faster in an ideal. It's just so fascinating. And I think, again, whether you're in the music industry, whether you're not in the music industry, there are lessons to be taken away from this, because at the end of the day, it's all about willing something into existence, maximizing the return on every interaction that you have, building relationships that compound over time. There's so many powerful ideas here, Rusty, that just apply far beyond music. That's one of the things that strikes me most about our conversation.
Well, thank you. You're very flattering, and I appreciate it. I'm sure I don't deserve that much credit, but thank you very much. It's very nice to hear you say that.
Well, Rusty, I mean, there is no question that I think you deserve a lot more credit than you ascribe to yourself. As we get ready to wrap up our conversation, I'm just looking back on all this so far. Like, is there one thing that you worried about a ton early on in your career that you wish you could go tell, 20-something-year-old Rusty not to worry so much about?
Absolutely, man. I can say it in one word: sobriety. I was bound and determined to be the drunkest person in every room that I walked into the first 15 years I did the music business. And I've been sober for 8 years now, and it has been a game changer in so many ways. I'm more present. I'm able to make smart decisions at the drop of a hat. I'm a better Christian. I'm a better father. I'm a better husband. I'm a better employee. I feel like the artists that I work with benefit from that. And I just spent so much time partying in the early days. And that was just the Hootie guys and me. Like that's just what we did. We just drank, and one thing led to another, and it just grew from there. And it kind of snowballed. And I never really stopped partying after college. And I got to ride the Hootie train partying, and everybody expected it. And then at some point, you got to grow up, and you got to realize that you don't have to go to a lunch and order 3 martinis, or not every meeting needs to be a happy hour meeting. Like I'm a champion of coffee meetings these days at 4:00 in the afternoon. I love sober life. And I never thought that, like, when I first started thinking about not drinking, all I could think about was all the things that I'd be missing out on, and how hard it would be to watch a ball game on a Saturday afternoon or having friends over, grilling chicken wings, and how am I not going to drink on a Saturday night grilling chicken wings for an NC State football game? And going to the beach. How do you go to the beach and not drink? All those things. And once I got through the first time doing all those things without drinking, I realized, wow, there's a lot of other things I can do that I don't. And I used to think everybody else was drinking. And then I realized, hey, it was just me, and people were drinking to accommodate me. So if I could go back and say anything, I would say, man, you could have quit drinking a lot sooner, and it would have saved a lot of heartaches and a lot of money. And I would have been a much better fit person, and my faith journey would have been able to maximize itself a lot sooner. So I'm really proud of sobriety. I love living in sobriety. I've helped my daughter get sober recently, and it's so funny. My church is like, I'm the guy. Somebody like, oh, you have a problem with alcohol? You should call Rusty. Like, Rusty will help you get to, like, I'm the guy that helps people get sober these days. But anyway, that's it in a nutshell. I'm not, you maybe wanted more of a business thing, but it really is. That's the one thing that has really been a game changer, and something I wish I could have done a lot sooner.
No, I wanted the truth, and you gave me the authentic truth, Rusty. And for that, I am grateful. I am so grateful for the conversation that we've had here. I could ask you questions about all this for hours and hours, and I hope we can do a part 2 sometime and dig into your story even more, and the work that you continue to do. But again, I kept kind of picking up different through lines, at least throughout our conversation, that at least were striking to me. And again, I'll go back to this idea of leading by example. I think at every turn, it strikes me that you led by example. You're never going to ask someone to do something that you weren't willing to do yourself. And even to the present day, where your church looks to you as an example.
Yeah, kind of like you pulling the tarp, huh?
Just like me pulling the tarp. We didn't get into the specifics of pulling the tarp, but one of the reasons I was really interested to dig into your story is because I feel like you're the ultimate tarp puller. I feel like,
man. I love that about you. I love when I read about you. I love that because, man, the first 5 years of my management career, I sold merchandise. I booked the band. I drove the van. I went to the bank every Monday morning. I did the accounting. I did everything. And to hear your story about pulling the tarp, I was like, yeah, man, that's what we need. Everybody should do everything at every company they work with. At some point, you should do it all.
I am a huge believer that the world will be a much better place when we build a world full of tarp pullers. And there is no question, Rusty, you are a tarp puller just like me. You know, when I worked in minor league baseball, it started in the front office when I had my nice clothes on, thinking I was going to work in the front office on the business side of sports. And then next thing I know, I'm out there pulling the tarp with the grounds crew. Then I'm dressing as the mascot. I'm driving players to the airport. I'm cleaning up fireworks debris in the outfield. I'm inflating the moon bounces for the fans to bounce on in between innings. I was doing it all, and it is one of the greatest experiences that I've ever been a part of. There is no question in my mind, Rusty, you are a tarp puller, certified member of the Everybody Pulls the Tarp family. We'll have to do a part 2 sometime. All right, my friend?
Happy to be in that family. So, yes, and I would love to come back anytime you want me to, man. It's been great talking to you.
We'll talk again soon. All right. Thank you so much, Rusty. Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Instagram at AndrewMoses123 and sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Until next time, keep pulling the tarp.